Katie Blake pushed through the thick green leaves that blocked her path. The morning sun barely reached the forest floor through the tall trees above her head. She had been walking for 2 hours looking for the blue mushrooms that grew near the water. Her stomach made hungry sounds, but she ignored them. Food was always hard to find in this place. The girl was 15 years old but looked older because of the hard life she lived alone. Her brown hair was tied back with a piece of rope she had found. Her clothes were patched and dirty from living in the wild. She carried a small bag made from animal skin and held a sharp knife her father had given her before he died. 3 years had passed since the transport ship crashed in this forest. Katie remembered the loud noise and the fire. She remembered her mother screaming and her father trying to save them all. But the ship was too damaged and her parents died from their injuries 2 days later. Katie had been hurt too, but she lived. Now she was the only human left on this part of the planet. The forest was not safe for humans. The blue-skinned people who lived here did not like visitors. They called themselves Sylvani, and they thought the forest belonged only to them. Katie had seen them watching her from behind trees sometimes. They had golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Most humans were afraid of them, but Katie had learned to stay hidden and avoid their villages. She knew where to find water and which plants were safe to eat. She had built a small house from pieces of the crashed ship. It was not much, but it kept her dry when it rained. At night she could hear strange animals making sounds in the darkness. Some were dangerous, but she had learned which ones to fear and which ones to ignore. Katie reached the stream where the blue mushrooms grew. The water was clear and cold. She knelt down and filled her water bottle, then looked around for the mushrooms. They were hard to see because they grew under rocks and fallen logs. She found 3 small ones and put them in her bag. It was not much food, but it would help. As she stood up to leave, she heard something that made her stop. It was a crying sound, but not from an animal. It sounded like a child. Katie looked around but saw nothing. The crying came again, and this time it was louder. Someone was in trouble. Katie knew she should walk away. If it was one of the Sylvani children, then helping might bring danger. The blue people did not trust humans, and they might hurt her if they found her near their young. But the crying sounded so sad and scared that Katie could not just leave. She followed the sound deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, and strange flowers glowed with soft light. The air smelled sweet like honey, but also had a sharp smell that made her nose tingle. This was Sylvani territory, and Katie had never been this far into their land before. The crying was coming from somewhere ahead. Katie moved carefully and quietly like her father had taught her when they went hunting. She stepped around thorny bushes and over fallen branches. The sound was getting louder, which meant she was getting close. Then she saw it. There was a deep hole in the ground covered with sharp vines. The hole was like a trap that animals might fall into. But the thing trapped inside was not an animal. It was a small Sylvani child. The child had blue-green skin that was torn and bleeding from the thorns. His golden eyes were wide with fear, and tears ran down his face. He was trying to climb out, but the sides of the hole were too steep, and the vines cut him when he tried to grab them. He looked up and saw Katie standing at the edge of the hole. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The child stopped crying, and Katie could see the fear in his eyes change to confusion. He had probably never seen a human this close before. Katie guessed he was about 6 years old, but it was hard to tell with the Sylvani people. Katie knew this was dangerous. If other Sylvani found her here, they would think she had hurt the child. They might kill her before she could explain. The smart thing to do was to run away and pretend she had never seen anything. But looking at the scared little boy, Katie knew she could not leave him to die. She put down her bag and looked around for something to help. There were long vines growing on nearby trees. Katie cut several of them with her knife and tied them together to make a rope. She tested it to make sure it would hold her weight. The child watched everything she did. When Katie threw one end of the vine rope down to him, he just stared at it. Katie pointed to the rope and then pointed up. She made climbing motions with her hands. The child seemed to understand, but he was afraid. Katie tried to remember the few Sylvani words she had heard before. She thought the word for safe was something like Thala. She said it quietly and smiled at the child. She pointed to herself and said her name slowly. Then she pointed to the rope again. The child reached out with a small blue hand and grabbed the vine. Katie held the other end tight and began to pull. The child was light, but the thorns made it hard for him to climb. Katie had to be very careful not to let him fall back down. Her arms hurt from holding the rope, but she did not give up. Finally, the child reached the top of the hole. Katie grabbed his arm and pulled him to safety. They both sat on the ground, breathing hard. The child was covered in small cuts from the thorns, and he was shaking from fear and cold. Katie looked at his wounds. Some were deep and bleeding badly. She opened her bag and took out a small bottle of medicine her mother had made before she died. She also had some clean cloth for bandages. The child watched as Katie cleaned his cuts and put medicine on them. He winced when it stung, but he did not pull away. When she was done, Katie gave him some water from her bottle. The child drank it quickly and seemed to feel better. Katie pointed to herself again and said her name. The child pointed to himself and said something that sounded like Zephyr. Katie smiled and repeated the name. The child smiled back, and Katie saw that his fear was starting to go away. But now Katie had a bigger problem. She had saved the child, but she did not know how to get him back to his people safely. Katie helped Zephyr stand up and checked his wounds again. The bleeding had stopped, but he was still weak from being trapped in the hole. She needed to find a safe place for them to rest before dark. The forest became much more dangerous when the sun went down. Zephyr tried to walk, but his legs were shaky. Katie put his arm around her shoulder and helped him move. She spoke softly to him in English, even though she knew he probably did not understand most of the words. Her voice seemed to calm him down. They walked slowly through the forest looking for shelter. Katie avoided the paths that the Silvani used and stayed in the thick parts where the trees would hide them. She found a small clearing next to a large rock that would protect them from the wind. There was also a tiny stream nearby for fresh water. Katie helped Zephyr sit down against the rock. She gathered dry leaves and small branches to make a bed for him. The Silvani child watched everything she did with curious golden eyes. When Katie pulled out some dried fruit from her bag and offered it to him, he ate it hungrily. Katie noticed something strange while Zephyr was eating. The plants around him seemed to be growing brighter and more colorful. The grass under his feet looked greener, and the flowers nearby opened their petals wider. It was like the forest was responding to his presence. As the sun began to set, Katie built a small fire. She had learned to make fires that did not create much smoke so they would not be seen from far away. The light and warmth made Zephyr feel safer. He curled up on the bed of leaves and closed his eyes. Katie tried to sleep, but she could not stop thinking about what would happen tomorrow. She had to find a way to return Zephyr to his people without getting herself killed. The Silvani did not trust humans, and they might think she had kidnapped their child. Just as Katie was starting to fall asleep, she heard a low growling sound coming from the darkness beyond their fire. Her eyes snapped open and she grabbed her knife. The growling came again, and this time it was closer. 3 pairs of red eyes appeared at the edge of the clearing. Shadow cats. Katie had seen these animals before, and she knew they were very dangerous. They hunted at night, and their black fur made them almost invisible in the darkness. Each one was as big as a wolf with long claws and sharp teeth. The shadow cats moved slowly into the clearing. They could smell the blood from Zephyr's wounds, and they were hungry. Katie stood up and held her knife ready. She knew the small blade would not do much damage to these big animals, but it was all she had. The first shadow cat jumped at Katie with its claws out. She rolled to the side and slashed with her knife. The blade cut across the animal's shoulder, and it yowled in pain. The other 2 cats circled around, trying to get behind her. Katie stayed close to the fire, where she could see better. She waved a burning branch at the cats to keep them back. One of them tried to grab the branch, but Katie pulled it away and stabbed at the cat's face. The animal jumped back, but did not run away. Zephyr woke up when he heard the fighting. He saw Katie trying to protect him from the shadow cats, and his golden eyes went wide with fear. But instead of running away, he did something that surprised Katie. He began to make soft singing sounds in his own language. The singing had an immediate effect on the forest around them. The trees began to glow with a soft blue light. Flowers opened and released sweet smells into the air. Even the grass under their feet started to shine. The shadow cats stopped attacking and looked around in confusion. Katie realized that Zephyr was using some kind of Silvani magic to talk to the forest. The plants and trees were responding to his call for help, but the shadow cats were not giving up yet. They were just more careful now. One of the cats tried to attack again, but this time the tree branches reached down and grabbed it. The animal struggled but could not break free from the strong wooden arms. The other two cats saw what happened and began to back away from the clearing. Katie was amazed by what she was seeing. She had heard stories about the Silvani having special powers, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. Zephyr was just a small child, but he could make the whole forest come alive to protect them. The shadow cats finally decided it was too dangerous to stay. They ran back into the darkness, making angry sounds as they left. The tree branches let go of the cat they had caught, and it limped away to join the others. Katie and Zephyr were safe, but Katie was breathing hard from the fight. She had cuts on her arms from the cat claws and her clothes were torn. Blood was running down her left arm, but she ignored the pain. She was more worried about Zephyr, who looked very tired from using his powers. The blue glow was fading from the trees and flowers. Katie sat down next to Zephyr and checked to make sure he was not hurt worse. The little boy looked up at her with gratitude in his golden eyes. He reached out and touched the cuts on her arm. Where his fingers touched her skin, the pain went away, and the bleeding stopped. Katie stared at her arm in amazement. The cuts were still there, but they were healing much faster than they should. Zephyr had somehow used his magic to help her, just like she had helped him. Katie smiled and patted his shoulder gently. The rest of the night passed quietly. Katie took turns sleeping and watching for more danger while Zephyr rested against the rock. When the sun came up, Katie knew they had to start moving again. She had to find Zephyr's village and return him to his family. But first she needed to figure out which direction to go. Katie had never been this deep in Silvani territory before, and all the trees looked the same to her. She hoped Zephyr would be able to help her find the way home. Katie woke Zephyr gently and gave him some water and food. The little boy seemed stronger this morning, and his wounds were healing well. When Katie pointed in different directions and made questioning sounds, Zephyr pointed toward the rising sun. That was where his home was. Katie packed up their small camp and helped Zephyr stand. They began walking east through the forest toward his village. Katie hoped his people would understand that she had only tried to help their child and not hurt him. Katie and Zephyr walked through the forest as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. The deeper they went into Silvani lands, the more strange and beautiful everything became. The trees were taller here, and their leaves shimmered with colors Katie had never seen before. Flowers sang soft melodies when the wind touched them, and streams of water flowed uphill in impossible spirals. Zephyr was getting stronger as they walked. He no longer needed Katie to help him stand, and his cuts were healing amazingly fast. But Katie noticed he was very quiet and seemed worried about something. She wished she could speak his language better so she could ask him what was wrong. They had to stop often to rest because Katie was not used to traveling so far. During one of these breaks, Zephyr surprised her by speaking in broken English. His voice was high and soft like music. "Why you help me?" he asked, with his head tilted to one side like a curious bird. Katie thought about how to answer in simple words he would understand. "You were hurt and scared. I could not leave you alone." Zephyr stared at her with his big golden eyes. "My people say humans are bad. They say humans only think about themselves and hurt everything they touch." Katie felt sad when she heard this. She knew some humans were bad, but not all of them. "Some humans are bad," she said slowly. "But some are good. Just like some Silvani might be bad, and some are good." The little boy seemed to think about this for a long time. Then he pointed to a patch of dead plants nearby. "Humans did this. They put poison in the ground and killed the singing flowers." Katie looked at the brown and withered plants. She had seen areas like this before in the forest, but she had not known what caused them. "I'm sorry," she said. "I did not know humans did this. It is very sad." They continued walking, and Zephyr began to tell Katie about his people. The Silvani had lived in this forest for thousands of years. They could talk to plants and animals and help them grow strong and healthy. But in recent years, something bad was happening to their sacred places. Trees were dying and animals were getting sick. The elders say it started when humans came to our world, Zephyr explained as they climbed over a fallen log. They think human machines and buildings are poisoning everything. Katie listened carefully to what he was saying. She remembered her parents talking about problems with the planet before their ship crashed. They had been scientists studying the environment, and they were worried about something they had discovered. But Katie had been too young to understand what they meant. As they walked, Katie told Zephyr about her own life. She explained how her parents had died and how she had learned to live alone in the forest. She told him about finding food and water and building shelter. She also told him about being careful not to hurt the plants and animals around her home. "You live like Silvani," Zephyr said with surprise in his voice. "You do not cut down trees or kill animals for fun." Katie nodded. "My mother taught me that all living things are connected. If we hurt the forest cannot help us survive." This seemed to make Zephyr happy. He smiled for the first time since Katie had found him. "Maybe you are different from other humans," he said. They reached a wide river that blocked their path. The water was moving fast and looked deep. Katie could see stepping stones across the river, but they were far apart and slippery looking. This would be dangerous for both of them, but especially for Zephyr, who was still recovering from his injuries. Katie was trying to figure out the safest way to cross when Zephyr walked up to the edge of the water. He knelt down and put his hands in the river. He began to sing the same soft melody Katie had heard the night before when the shadow cats attacked them. The water began to glow with the same blue light that had come from the trees. Slowly the river started to change. The fast current slowed down and the water level dropped. More stepping stones appeared as if they were growing up from the bottom of the river. Katie watched in amazement as Zephyr created a safe path across the water. When he was finished, he stood up and smiled at her. "Now we can cross," he said simply. They made their way carefully from stone to stone. The water was calm and peaceful now instead of wild and dangerous. Katie realized that Zephyr had not just made the crossing safer for them. He had also made it better for all the small animals that needed to drink from the river. On the other side, they entered a part of the forest that was clearly special to the Silvani people. The trees here were arranged in perfect circles and paths were marked with glowing stones. Everything was clean and beautiful, like a living garden that took care of itself. But Katie also noticed more dead patches where plants had withered and died. Whatever was killing the forest was affecting even these sacred places. Zephyr saw her looking at the brown spots and his face became sad again. "This is why my people are angry," he said quietly. "Every day more of our home dies and we do not know how to stop it." Katie knelt down and touched the dead soil. It felt strange under her fingers, like it was not just lacking water and nutrients, but missing something else entirely. She had a feeling this was connected to what her parents had been studying before they died. They walked for several more hours before Zephyr stopped and pointed ahead through the trees. "My village is close now," he said. "But I am scared." Katie asked him why he was scared, and Zephyr explained that he had been told never to go near humans. His parents and the village elders would be very angry that he had let a human help him. They might think Katie had done something bad to him even though she had saved his life. "Will they hurt you because of me?" Katie asked, with worry in her voice. Zephyr shook his head. "They will not hurt me, but they might hurt you. They think all humans are dangerous." Katie thought about this problem. She could leave Zephyr here at the edge of his village and let him go home alone. That would be the safe thing for her to do. But she was worried that Zephyr might get in trouble for being away from home, or that his people might not believe his story about falling in the hole. "I will come with you," Katie decided. "I will explain to your people what happened. Maybe they will understand." Zephyr looked surprised. "You would do that for me even though it is dangerous for you?" Katie nodded. "You are my friend now. Friends help each other even when it is scary." Zephyr smiled and took Katie's hand in his small blue one. Together they walked toward his village, hoping that his people would listen to their story before making any decisions about what to do with the human girl who had saved one of their children. Katie felt her heart beating fast as they approached the edge of Silverleaf Village. She could see the tops of strange buildings through the trees ahead. They did not look like any houses she had ever seen before. Instead of being built from wood or metal, they seemed to be grown from living trees that had been shaped into homes. Zephyr squeezed her hand tighter as they got closer. "Remember," he whispered, "stay close to me, and do not make any fast movements. My people will be very surprised to see a human here." The first thing Katie noticed when they entered the village was how quiet everything was. Not quiet like a human town where people might be sleeping or working inside their houses. This was a different kind of quiet where even the air seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The houses were incredible to look at. Each one was made from a giant tree that had been carefully grown and shaped over many years. The walls were smooth bark, and the windows were gaps between branches that had been trained to grow in perfect patterns. Glowing flowers hung from the roof edges like living lights, and paths between the houses were made of soft moss that felt good under their feet. Katie could see Silvani people moving around the village, but they seemed to be avoiding the area where she and Zephyr were walking. She caught glimpses of blue-green skin and golden eyes watching them from behind tree trunks and through windows. Word was spreading quickly that a human had entered their sacred home. Zephyr led Katie toward the center of the village where the largest treehouse stood. This building was different from the others because it seemed to be made from several trees that had grown together into one massive structure. The trunk was so wide that 20 people holding hands could not reach around it. As they got closer to the central tree, Katie heard voices speaking rapidly in the Silvani language. The sounds were musical, like singing, but she could tell from the tone that the people were upset and maybe frightened. She was starting to think this had been a very bad idea. Suddenly, Silvani warriors stepped out from behind trees all around them. There were at least 10 of them, and they all carried weapons that looked like they had been grown from plants instead of made from metal. The spears had sharp thorns for points, and the bows were made from bent branches that still had leaves growing on them. Katie stopped walking and raised her hands to show she was not carrying any weapons. Her knife was still in her belt, but she did not reach for it. Zephyr moved in front of her and began speaking quickly in his own language. Katie could tell he was trying to explain what had happened, but the warriors did not seem to be listening. One of the warriors pointed his thorn spear at Katie and said something that sounded like a command. Katie did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was not welcome here, and they wanted her to leave immediately. Zephyr raised his voice and spoke even faster. He pointed to his bandaged wounds and then to Katie. He was telling them that she had saved his life, but Katie could see that some of the warriors were not believing him. They probably thought she had hurt him and was now forcing him to lie for her. More Silvani people were gathering around them now. Katie saw men and women and children all staring at her with expressions of fear and anger. Some of them were holding farming tools like they might use them as weapons if needed. Katie felt very small and alone, surrounded by so many people who did not trust her. Then the crowd parted and someone new walked into the circle. Katie knew immediately that this person was very important because everyone else stepped back and bowed their heads when she approached. She was an old Silvani woman with silver hair that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her skin was pale blue, green like the color of deep water, and her golden eyes were wise and ancient. The old woman walked slowly around Katie, looking at her from all sides. Katie stayed very still and tried not to show how scared she was. When the woman was finished with her examination, she spoke to Zephyr in a gentle voice. Zephyr answered her questions and pointed to Katie several times. Katie could tell they were talking about what had happened in the forest. Zephyr was explaining about falling in the thorn pit and how Katie had rescued him. He told about the shadow cats and how Katie had fought them to protect him. He also mentioned how Katie had cared for his wounds and given him food and water. The old woman listened to everything Zephyr said without interrupting. When he was finished, she asked him a few more questions. Then she turned to Katie and spoke in careful English. "I am Elder Mira Thornwick," she said in a voice that sounded like wind blowing through leaves. "I am the leader of this village and the keeper of our ancient laws." Zephyr tells me you saved his life at great risk to yourself. Is this true? Katie was surprised that the elder could speak her language. Yes, she answered honestly. He was trapped and hurt. I could not leave him there to die. Elder Thornwick nodded slowly. And why should we believe that you did not hurt him yourself and then pretend to rescue him to gain our trust? This was the question Katie had been afraid someone would ask. She looked around at all the suspicious faces watching her and tried to think of the right answer. I have been living alone in your forest for 3 years, she said. If I wanted to hurt your people, I could have done it many times before now. I stay hidden because I do not want to cause trouble. The elder raised one eyebrow. You have been living in our forest for 3 years and we did not know about it? Katie nodded. I built my home from pieces of a crashed ship. I learned to find food and water without damaging your trees or plants. I have always been careful to respect your land. Elder Thornwick turned and spoke to the other villagers in their own language. There was a long discussion with many people, talking at once. Katie could not understand the words, but she could tell they were arguing about what to do with her. Finally, Elder Thornwick held up her hand for silence. She looked directly at Katie with her ancient golden eyes. Our laws are very old and very clear about what happens when humans enter our sacred places. Normally you would be driven away or worse, but Zephyr has invoked something that has not happened in many generations. Katie did not understand what she meant, but it sounded serious. What has he invoked? She asked. By saving the life of one of our children at risk to yourself, you have triggered what we call the sanctuary bond. This is an ancient law that requires us to treat you as a guest, rather than an enemy. But the final decision about your fate must be made by the full Council of Leaves. Elder Thornwick gestured toward the great tree in the center of the village. You will spend this night as our prisoner, but you will not be harmed. Tomorrow at sunrise you will face the council, and they will decide if you are truly worthy of the sanctuary bond or if you are a danger that must be removed. 2 warriors stepped forward to escort Katie toward the great tree. As they walked, she looked back at Zephyr, who was being led away by other villagers. She hoped she had made the right choice by coming here. Tomorrow she would learn if saving one small child would cost her life or change everything between their 2 peoples. When the sun reached the top of the sky, Katie was brought back to the sacred grove. This time even more Silvani people had gathered to hear the council's decision. She could see faces in the crowd that looked hopeful, and others that seemed angry. The whole village was divided about what to do with her. Elder Mira Thornwick stood before the Council of Leaves with a scroll made from tree bark in her hands. The paper looked very old, and the writing on it glowed with the same soft light that came from the trees. Katie had never seen anything like it before. People of Silverleaf Village, Elder Thornwick began in a voice that carried clearly across the grove. Today we have witnessed something that has not happened in over 1,000 years. A member of another species has risked her own life to save one of our children with no thought of reward or gain. The elder unrolled the ancient scroll and began to read from it. Long ago, our ancestors wrote laws to govern how we should treat those who show such courage and selflessness. These laws were written when our world was shared with another people called the Ancients, who also possessed the gift of protecting the innocent. Katie listened carefully as Elder Thornwick explained the history. The Ancients had been a peaceful people who lived in harmony with both the Silvani and the forest itself. They had the unusual ability to put the safety of others before their own survival, even when helping meant great danger to themselves. The Ancients and our people lived together for many generations, the elder continued. Our children played together, and our families shared food and knowledge. But one day the Ancients vanished without explanation, leaving behind only their ancient sites and the laws they helped us write. Elder Thornwick looked directly at Katie as she spoke the next words. One of those laws is called the sanctuary bond. It states that any being who saves the life of a Silvani child at great personal risk shall be welcomed as a forest guardian and protected by all our tribes. The crowd began to murmur in excitement and confusion. Katie could tell this was not what many of them had expected to hear. Some seemed pleased, but others looked worried about what this might mean. Katie Blake, Elder Thornwick said formally, By saving young Zephyr from certain death, you have activated the sanctuary bond. You are no longer considered an outsider or an enemy. You are now a forest guardian, with all the rights and protections that title brings. One of the council members stood up and added more explanation. This means that Katie must be treated with the same respect we would show our own elders. Any Silvani who harms her or threatens her will face punishment from all 12 tribes. She may travel freely through our lands, and she may call upon our help in times of need. Katie felt overwhelmed by what she was hearing. She had expected to be judged and possibly punished for entering their territory. Instead, she was being given a position of honor that had not been used for 1,000 years. But Elder Thornwick was not finished speaking. The activation of the sanctuary bond also means something else, she said in a more serious tone. According to our oldest records, this only happens when great danger threatens our world, and we need the special gifts that forest guardians possess. The elder gestured to several young Silvani who came forward carrying beautiful objects made from crystal and living wood. It is our tradition to present gifts to a new forest guardian as a sign of acceptance and respect. These gifts have been waiting in our treasure chambers for generations. Katie watched in amazement as the gifts were placed before her. There was a necklace made from singing crystals that would allow her to communicate with forest animals. There was a cloak woven from spider silk and moonbeams that would protect her from cold and rain. There was also a staff carved from the heartwood of the great mother tree that would help her channel the forest's power. As Katie reached out to touch the crystal necklace, she felt a strange, tingling sensation run through her fingers. The moment the crystals made contact with her skin, they began to glow, and she could suddenly hear new sounds from all around the grove. She realized she was hearing the thoughts and feelings of the birds in the trees and the small animals hiding in the grass. Elder Thornwick smiled when she saw Katie's surprise. "The gifts are accepting you," she explained. "This proves that the forest itself recognizes you as a true guardian." But then the elder's expression became more serious. "However, there is something else you must know. The reason the sanctuary bond has been activated after so many years is because our world is in great danger. The sickness that is killing our sacred groves is not a natural disease." Katie listened carefully as Elder Thornwick explained what their scouts had discovered. The dead patches in the forest were not caused by human pollution as they had first believed. Instead, they were the result of attacks by an enemy that most of the village had never heard of before. There are creatures from the dark spaces between stars that feed on the life energy of entire worlds, the elder said quietly. "We call them the Void Hunters, and they have been secretly poisoning our planet for many years. They hide in the shadows and use weapons that drain the life force from everything they touch." Katie felt a chill run down her spine. This sounded like something her parents might have been studying before their ship was shot down. Maybe their death had not been an accident. After all, Elder Thornwick continued the explanation. The Void Hunters are very careful to make their attacks look like natural disasters or the fault of other species. They have been making the Silvani and humans blame each other for the environmental damage while they slowly kill our world from within. The elder looked around at all the worried faces in the crowd. But now that a forest guardian has been chosen, the ancient defenses of our world are beginning to wake up. Katie Blake carries within her the same protective instincts that the ancients possessed. She may be the key to fighting back against this hidden enemy. Katie felt a heavy weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was just a 15-year-old girl who had been trying to survive alone in the forest. How could she possibly fight against creatures from space that had technology powerful enough to destroy entire planets? But then she looked at Zephyr, who was standing near the front of the crowd. His golden eyes were shining with trust and hope. He believed in her even if she did not believe in herself yet. Elder Thornwick placed a gentle hand on Katie's shoulder. "You do not have to face this danger alone," she said kindly. "All of our tribes will stand with you. And there may be other humans on this world who would help us if they knew the truth about what was really happening." Katie nodded slowly as she began to understand the magnitude of what was being asked of her. Saving Zephyr had been just the beginning. Now she had to help save an entire world from an enemy that most people did not even know existed. But for the first time in 3 years, Katie did not feel completely alone. She had found a family among the Silvani people, and they were counting on her to help protect everything they held dear. Over the next 3 days, messengers arrived at Silverleaf Village from all across the forest. Katie learned that news of the forest guardian traveled faster than any human technology could move. The Silvani used the trees themselves to send messages, from one tribe to another, through an ancient network of connected roots and branches. Each messenger brought the same request from their tribal leaders. They wanted to meet the human girl who had activated the sanctuary bond and hear her story for themselves. Elder Thornwick explained that this was both an honor and a necessity, because all 12 tribes needed to agree before any major decisions could be made about fighting the Void Hunters. Katie spent hours each day learning to use her new abilities as a forest guardian. The crystal necklace allowed her to speak with animals who told her about strange sightings in distant parts of the forest. Birds reported seeing metal objects that moved through the sky without making sound. Ground creatures spoke of areas where the earth itself felt sick and wrong. The cloak of spider silk and moonbeams was more amazing than Katie had first realized. When she wore it, she could move through the forest almost invisibly, and it protected her from thorns and branches that would normally tear her clothes. The staff made from hardwood helped her understand the plant language that the Silvani used to communicate over long distances. On the 4th morning, Katie woke to find the grove filled with Silvani from tribes she had never seen before. There were tall mountain people with skin like granite and short river dwellers who seemed to shimmer like water. There were desert Silvani with golden skin and ice people whose breath created small clouds in the warm air. Elder Thornwick introduced Katie to the visiting tribal leaders. Each one studied her carefully and asked questions about how she had come to live in the forest and why she had chosen to save Zephyr. Katie answered honestly and found that most of them seemed satisfied with her responses. But Elder Caney Stormwind from the northern peaks had different concerns. He was a serious-looking Silvani with silver hair and scars on his arms from old battles. "I do not question your courage," he told Katie bluntly, "but you are very young and inexperienced. How can we be sure you are ready to face an enemy that has been defeating us for years?" Before Katie could answer, Elder Thornwick gestured toward the center of the grove. "Perhaps it is time to show her the full truth about what we are fighting," she said solemnly. The tribal elders formed a circle around Katie and began to sing in harmony. Their voices created a melody that seemed to resonate through the ground itself. The trees around the grove responded by growing new branches that intertwined above their heads, creating a natural dome of leaves and wood. Inside this living shelter, something extraordinary began to happen. The air itself started to glow, and images appeared floating in the space above Katie's head. She realized the elders were using their combined power to create a visual record of everything they had learned about the Void Hunters. The first images showed Katie's home planet as it had looked when humans first arrived. The continents were green and healthy with vast forests and clean oceans. Cities had been built in harmony with the natural environment, and both humans and Silvani seemed to be thriving. But then the images changed to show what had happened over the past 5 years. Strange ships began appearing in the outer regions of the solar system. They were long and dark with no visible engines or weapons. These were the Void Hunter vessels, and they moved through space like deadly shadows. Katie watched in horror as the alien ships began their attack on the planet. But instead of destroying cities or armies, they targeted something much more subtle and dangerous. They released a kind of energy weapon that drained the life force from living things while making it look like natural disease or human-caused pollution. The images showed how the Void Hunters had been very careful to hide their presence. They made their attacks look like accidents or the result of conflicts between humans and Silvani. While the two species blamed each other for environmental problems, the real enemy grew stronger by feeding on the planet's dying ecosystems. Elder Thornwick pointed to one particular image that made Katie's blood run cold. It showed her family's transport ship being shot down by a Void Hunter vessel. "Your parents were not killed in an accident," the elder said gently. "They were murdered because they had discovered evidence of the alien presence." Katie felt tears running down her face as she learned the truth about her parents' death. They had been scientists studying the environmental changes on the planet, and they had realized that something was artificially causing the damage. The Void Hunters had killed them to keep their discovery secret. The images continued to show how the alien attacks had intensified over the past 3 years. More ships had arrived, and they were preparing for a final assault that would drain all remaining life from the planet. According to the Elders' calculations, they had perhaps 6 months before the world became completely uninhabitable. But there was also hope in the images. The Elders showed Katie ancient records of how the Ancients had fought similar enemies long ago. The key to victory was not advanced weapons or superior numbers. It was the unique human ability to form bonds across species lines and inspire others to fight for something greater than themselves. Elder Stormwind stepped forward, and his stern expression had changed to one of respect. "Now I understand why the Sanctuary Bond chose you," he said to Katie. "It was not just because you saved one child. It was because you represent something the Void Hunters cannot comprehend or defeat." Katie wiped the tears from her eyes and looked around at all the tribal leaders. "What do you need me to do?" she asked with determination in her voice. "Elder," Thornwick smiled proudly. "First we must unite all our people against the common enemy. Then we must reach out to the human settlements and convince them to join us. The Void Hunters have kept our species fighting each other, but together we might be strong enough to drive them away." Elder Mara Swiftcurrent from the River Clans added her thoughts. "The ancient texts say that forest guardians have the power to awaken sleeping defenses built into the planet itself. If we can access those defenses, we might be able to turn the Void Hunters' own weapons against them." Katie felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier, but she also felt something else. For the first time since her parents died, she had a real purpose and people who believed in her. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive alone in the forest. She was a bridge between species, and possibly the key to saving an entire world. "Elder," Thornwick placed the ancient scroll in Katie's hands. "This contains all the knowledge our people have gathered about the Void Hunters and the old defenses. Study it well, because soon we will need to put that knowledge to use." Katie looked down at the glowing symbols on the bark paper and felt the crystal necklace grow warm against her skin. Somehow she knew she would be able to understand the ancient writing, even though she had never seen it before. The forest itself was helping her learn what she needed to know. The meeting ended with all 12 tribal leaders pledging their support to Katie and the fight against the Void Hunters, as they prepared to return to their own territories to rally. Their warriors, Katie realized that saving Zephyr had been just the beginning of a much larger adventure. Tomorrow the real work would begin. 6 months later, Katie stood in the rebuilt sacred grove watching the morning sun rise over a world that had been transformed. The grove was no longer just a Silvani gathering place, but a meeting point where humans and Silvani worked together as partners. Children from both species played together under the great trees while their parents planned the day's activities. Katie was now 17 years old and looked very different from the scared girl who had once lived alone in the forest. She wore the ceremonial robes of a forest guardian, made from living vines that changed color with her moods. The crystal necklace around her neck glowed constantly as it helped her coordinate communication between hundreds of different groups across the planet. The war against the Void Hunters had been unlike anything anyone had expected. Instead of massive battles with explosions and destruction, it had been fought through acts of healing and creation. Katie had learned that the ancient planet defenses were not weapons in the traditional sense, but rather a network of life energy that could overwhelm the aliens' death-dealing technology. The key breakthrough had come when Katie used her guardian abilities to make contact with the human settlements. She had expected them to be suspicious of working with the Silvani, but instead she found people who were desperate for answers about the environmental disasters that had been plaguing their colonies. Dr. Lisa Chen from New Portland had been one of the first humans to join the alliance. She had been studying the same kind of ecological damage that Katie's parents had investigated, and she immediately understood the importance of what the Silvani had discovered. Within weeks, her research teams were working alongside Silvani plant specialists to trace the source of the artificial blight. The combined knowledge of human science and Silvani forest magic had created solutions that neither species could have developed alone. Human technology had helped map the locations of hidden Void Hunter bases, while Silvani Earth magic had found ways to neutralize their life-draining weapons. Katie remembered the day when they had finally located the main Void Hunter command ship. It had been hiding in a deep ocean trench using stealth technology that made it invisible to both human sensors and Silvani forest site. But when Katie had linked her guardian powers to a network of sea-dwelling Silvani, the alien's hiding place had been revealed. The final confrontation had not been a battle but rather an act of pure creation. Katie and representatives from all 12 Silvani tribes had joined hands with human volunteers from every settlement on the planet. Together they had channeled the life force of the entire world through the ancient defense network. The result had been spectacular. Instead of destroying the Void Hunter ships, the planet's life energy had simply overwhelmed them. The aliens who fed on death and decay could not survive in an environment saturated with growth and renewal. Their ships had been forced to flee to the dark spaces between stars where they belonged. But the most amazing discovery had come after the Void Hunters were gone. When human and Silvani scientists examined the abandoned alien technology, they found evidence that the vanished ancients had not disappeared at all. They had evolved into something new by combining human determination with Silvani harmony, and they had left the planet to carry that gift to other worlds threatened by the Void Dwellers. Katie walked through the grove greeting friends from both species as they prepared for another day of rebuilding. The environmental damage caused by the Void Hunters was healing faster than anyone had thought possible. Areas that had been dead and poisoned for years were now green and alive again. Zephyr ran up to Katie with a big smile on his face. He was now 9 years old and had become something like a little brother to her. He spent his days learning from both human teachers and Silvani elders as part of the new integrated education system they had created. "Katie," he said excitedly in perfect English. "The morning ships are coming back from the outer system. They found 3 more planets that need help with Void Hunter problems." Katie looked up at the sky where she could see the returning vessels. They were unlike anything that had existed before the Alliance. Human engineering had created the basic structure while Silvani plant magic had grown living components that could repair themselves and adapt to different environments. The ships were as much alive as they were mechanical. Captain Jake Morrison from the exploration vessel Unity approached Katie with his daily report. He was a former military officer who had lost his family to a Void Hunter attack, disguised as a plague outbreak. Now he commanded a crew of both humans and Silvani on missions to help other worlds fight the alien threat. "We made contact with the survivors on Kepler 438b, he told Katie. "They're dealing with the same kind of ecological warfare we faced. Here, the ruling council has formally requested assistance from the Forest Alliance." Katie nodded and made notes on a tablet grown from crystallized tree sap. The Forest Alliance was what they called their combined civilization now. It had grown from 12 Silvani tribes and a few human settlements to include over 50 worlds, across 3 star systems. Everywhere they went, they found people who had been fighting losing battles against Void Hunter infiltration. Elder Thornwick joined their conversation as she did every morning. She was now Katie's closest advisor and had become like a grandmother to her. The elderly Silvani had been instrumental in developing the new government structure that allowed both species to maintain their unique cultures while working toward common goals. "The Council of Worlds has approved the expansion mission," Elder Thornwick reported. "We now have authorization to send aid fleets to 12 more systems that have reported Void Hunter activity." Katie felt a mixture of pride and responsibility as she listened to the reports. What had started with her rescuing one lost child had grown into a galactic movement that was saving entire civilizations. But she never forgot that it had all begun with a simple choice to help someone in need. Dr. Chen arrived at the Grove with her latest research findings. She had been working with Silvani bioengineers to develop new forms of living technology that could detect and neutralize Void Hunter weapons before they caused damage. Her team had just finished testing a planetary shield system that could protect entire worlds from alien energy drains. "The results exceeded all our projections," Dr. Chen announced happily. "The biomechanical shield generators can cover a planet with a protective field that actually grows stronger when attacked by death energy weapons. The Void Hunters won't be able to use their stealth tactics anymore." Katie smiled as she thought about how far they had all come. The little girl who had once hidden from Silvani's scouts was now coordinating the defense of dozens of worlds. The species that had once viewed each other as enemies were now partners in the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever seen. As the morning planning session ended, Katie walked to the edge of the grove where a special monument had been built. It was a living sculpture grown from both human metal and Silvani wood that honored all those who had died fighting the Void Hunters, including her parents and many others who had never lived to see the victory they had helped make possible. Zephyr joined her at the monument as he often did. Together they stood in comfortable silence, remembering how their friendship had started and thinking about all the adventures that still lay ahead. The Forest Alliance was sending exploration missions to distant galaxies where other species might need their help. "Do you think we'll find more people like the ancients?" Zephyr asked quietly. Katie put her hand on his shoulder and looked up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the morning sky. "I think we'll find that every species has the potential to be like the ancients," she said thoughtfully. "They just need someone to show them how to work together instead of fighting each other." As they walked back toward the village, Katie reflected on the morning tribute that the Silvani had given her all those months ago. They had honored her for saving one child, but what they had really been celebrating was the beginning of a new age. An age when the barriers between species could be overcome by simple acts of courage and compassion. The forest whispered around them, carrying news of their success to other worlds and other peoples who were just beginning to learn that they were not alone in their fight against the darkness. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of friends they had not met yet. Katie Blake had started as an orphan girl trying to survive in an alien forest. Now she was a bridge between worlds and a symbol of hope for billions of beings across the stars. But she would always remember that it had all begun with one simple choice to help a lost child who needed a friend. The new dawn was breaking not just over their world, but across the entire galaxy, and Katie knew that the best adventures were still to come. 6 months later, Katie stood in the rebuilt sacred grove watching the morning sun rise over a world that had been transformed. The grove was no longer just a Silvani gathering place, but a meeting point where humans and Silvani worked together as partners. Children from both species played together under the great trees while their parents planned the day's activities. Katie was now 17 years old and looked very different from the scared girl who had once lived alone in the forest. She wore the ceremonial robes of a forest guardian made from living vines that changed color with her moods. The crystal necklace around her neck glowed constantly as it helped her coordinate communication between hundreds of different groups across the planet. The war against the Void Hunters had been unlike anything anyone had expected. Instead of massive battles with explosions and destruction, it had been fought through acts of healing and creation. Katie had learned that the ancient planet defenses were not weapons in the traditional sense, but rather a network of life energy that could overwhelm the aliens' death-dealing technology. The key breakthrough had come when Katie used her guardian abilities to make contact with the human settlements. She had expected them to be suspicious of working with the Silvani, but instead she found people who were desperate for answers about the environmental disasters that had been plaguing their colonies. Dr. Lisa Chen from New Portland had been one of the first humans to join the alliance. She had been studying the same kind of ecological damage that Katie's parents had investigated, and she immediately understood the importance of what the Silvani had discovered. Within weeks, her research teams were working alongside Silvani plant specialists to trace the source of the artificial blight. The combined knowledge of human science and Silvani forest magic had created solutions that neither species could have developed alone. Human technology had helped map the locations of hidden Void Hunter bases, while Silvani earth magic had found ways to neutralize their life-draining weapons. Katie remembered the day when they had finally located the main Void Hunter command ship. It had been hiding in a deep ocean trench using stealth technology that made it invisible to both human sensors and Silvani forest sight. But when Katie had linked her guardian powers to a network of sea-dwelling Silvani, the aliens' hiding place had been revealed. The final confrontation had not been a battle but rather an act of pure creation. Katie and representatives from all 12 Silvani tribes had joined hands with human volunteers from every settlement on the planet. Together, they had channeled the life force of the entire world through the ancient defense network. The result had been spectacular. Instead of destroying the Void Hunter ships, the planet's life energy had simply overwhelmed them. The aliens who fed on death and decay could not survive in an environment saturated with growth and renewal. Their ships had been forced to flee to the dark spaces between stars where they belonged. But the most amazing discovery had come after the Void Hunters were gone. When human and Sylvani scientists examined the abandoned alien technology, they found evidence that the vanished ancients had not disappeared at all. They had evolved into something new by combining human determination with Sylvani harmony, and they had left the planet to carry that gift to other worlds threatened by the Void Dwellers. Katie walked through the grove greeting friends from both species as they prepared for another day of rebuilding. The environmental damage caused by the Void Hunters was healing faster than anyone had thought possible. Areas that had been dead and poisoned for years were now green and alive again. Zephyr ran up to Katie with a big smile on his face. He was
now 9 years old and had become something like a little brother to her. He spent his days learning from both human teachers and Sylvani elders as part of the new integrated education system they had created. "Katie," he said excitedly in perfect
English. "The morning ships are coming back from the outer system. They found 3 more planets that need help with Void Hunter problems." Katie looked up at the sky where she could see the returning vessels. They were unlike anything that had existed before the Alliance. Human engineering had created the basic structure, while Sylvani plant magic had grown living components that could repair themselves and adapt to different environments. The ships were as much alive as they were mechanical. Captain Jake Morrison from the exploration vessel Unity approached Katie with his daily report. He was a former military officer who had lost his family to a Void Hunter attack disguised as a plague outbreak.
Now he commanded a crew of both humans and Sylvani on missions to help other worlds fight the alien threat. "We made contact with the survivors on Kepler 438b, he told Katie. "They're dealing with the same kind of ecological warfare we faced."
"Here, the ruling council has formally requested assistance from the Forest Alliance." Katie nodded and made notes on a tablet grown from crystallized tree sap. The Forest Alliance was what they called their combined civilization now. It had grown from 12 Sylvani tribes and a few human settlements to include over 50 worlds, across 3 star systems. Everywhere they went, they found people who had been fighting losing battles against Void Hunter infiltration. Elder Thornwick joined their conversation as she did every morning. She was now Katie's closest advisor and had become like a grandmother to her. The elderly Sylvani had been instrumental in developing the new government structure that allowed both species to maintain their unique cultures while working toward common goals. "The Council of Worlds has approved the expansion mission, Elder," Thornwick reported. "We now have authorization to send aid fleets to 12 more systems that have reported Void Hunter activity." Katie felt a mixture of pride and responsibility as she listened to the reports. What had started with her rescuing one lost child had grown into a galactic movement that was saving entire civilizations. But she never forgot that it had all begun with a simple choice to help someone in need. Dr. Chen arrived at the Grove with her latest research findings. She had been working with Sylvani bioengineers to develop new forms of living technology that could detect and neutralize Void Hunter weapons before they caused damage. Her team had just finished testing a planetary shield system that could protect entire worlds from alien energy drains. "The results exceeded all our projections," Dr. Chen announced happily. "The biomechanical shield generators can cover a planet, with a protective field that actually grows stronger when attacked by death energy weapons. The Void Hunters won't be able to use their stealth tactics anymore." Katie smiled as she thought about how far they had all come. The little girl who had once hidden from Sylvani scouts was now coordinating the defense of dozens of worlds. The species that had once viewed each other as enemies were now partners in the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever seen. As the morning planning session ended, Katie walked to the edge of the grove, where a special monument had been built. It was a living sculpture grown from both human metal and Sylvani wood that honored all those who had died fighting the Void Hunters, including her parents and many others who had never lived to see the victory they had helped make possible. Zephyr joined her at the monument as he often did. Together they stood in comfortable silence, remembering how their friendship had started, and thinking about all the adventures that still lay ahead. The Forest Alliance was sending exploration missions to distant galaxies where other species might need their help. "Do you think we'll find more people like the ancients?" Zephyr asked quietly. Katie put her hand on his shoulder and looked up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the morning sky. "I think we'll find that every species has the potential to be like the ancients," she said thoughtfully. "They just need someone to show them how to work together instead of fighting each other." As they walked back toward the village, Katie reflected on the morning tribute that the Sylvani had given her all those months ago. They had honored her for saving one child, but what they had really been celebrating was the beginning of a new age. An age when the barriers between species could be overcome by simple acts of courage and compassion. The forest whispered around them, carrying news of their success to other worlds and other peoples who were just beginning to learn that they were not alone in their fight against the darkness. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of friends they had not met yet. Katie Blake had started as an orphan girl trying to survive in an alien forest. Now she was a bridge between worlds and a symbol of hope for billions of beings across the stars. But she would always remember that it had all begun with one simple choice to help a lost child who needed a friend. The new dawn was breaking not just over their world, but across the entire galaxy, and Katie knew that the best adventures were still to come.